It started like any other conversation, but now everything feels completely out of control. My daughter came to me when she was 16, revealing something about herself that I wasn't prepared for. She was non-binary. Well, sort of. Some days, she felt more male. Other days, neither male nor female. And for a while, she wanted me to ask her every single day how she felt, what pronoun she wanted me to use that day. I didn't sign up for that. My whole life wasn't going to revolve around a daily guessing game of who she was feeling like that day. So, I told her I would try my best to use whatever pronoun she wanted, but she was going to have to tell me each day. This wasn't going to be some unpredictable game. It went on for about 2 weeks before she seemed to lose interest in it altogether. Eventually, she just asked me to call her again, even though she still identified as non-binary. At least I didn't have to guess anymore. Fine, that was fine. But the trouble didn't stop there. Now, at 18, my daughter is pregnant. And to be honest, it feels like she's completely lost her grip. This past year has been nothing short of a struggle. She's wanted to take a gap year before going off to community college, but she hasn't been able to keep a job. She claims it's because retail is too phobic against her non-binary status. But when I ask for any specifics, all I get are vague explanations and a defensive attitude. She dresses exactly as a young adult female, yet every job she's had this year, 4 or 5, has ended in her quitting. She doesn't even want to try a call center job because she doesn't like talking on the phone. She's been looking for remote work without success, and she hasn't had a job since Thanksgiving. I was getting to the point where I had to lay down the law. She either needed to go to school full-time or find a full-time job, or she was going to have to move out. But then she dropped the bombshell. She's 5 months pregnant. She's furious with me. She says it's my fault, all because I didn't put her on puberty-blocking hormones when she asked 2 years ago. Now, she's convinced that I'm trying to feminize her by giving her birth control pills. She's even been throwing them away. Honestly, I snapped. I never use that kind of language, especially with my child, but at that moment, I just lost it. What was I supposed to do? Go back in time and put her on hormones? This whole birth control thing is new to me, and frankly, it makes no sense. If she didn't want estrogen, she could have just asked. She's got her own medical card, for crying out loud. I could have driven her to the doctor. She's had every option available to her, and she's used none of it. The school handed out free condoms like candy. Her friends even used them as balloons and left them all over the house. She had every opportunity, and now this is where we are. But that's not even the worst part. We're well past the point where abortion is an option, and if she had wanted it, I would have supported her. We live in a state where it's protected, and we could afford it. But she's known she was pregnant for 2 months now, and she seems to think of the baby as a sibling. She wants me to raise it like it's my own, to take on the responsibility as if it's just another child in the family. I couldn't believe it. She says I'm the one who caused her pregnancy by not accepting her non-binary identity. Now, because of that, I'm supposed to raise her child. She thinks it's my duty. Her language was getting more and more defiant. I said absolutely not. There was no way in hell I was raising her baby. She also refuses to tell me who the father is. As if things weren't complicated enough, I'm left wondering who the father is. She has some male friends who don't identify as male anymore. Could one of them be the father? I have no idea. But when she told me that she sees the baby as a sibling and expects me to raise it, I snapped. And now she's locked herself in her room, wailing and crying. It's been 12 hours, and I know she won't come out until she gets hungry, probably has snacks stashed in there. And now I don't know what to do. She's pregnant, and I'm trying to balance the emotions of this situation. Being pregnant messes with your head, no doubt. I want to blame that, but part of me feels like I've raised a spoiled brat. Or worse, maybe she's developing a personality disorder. So here I am, not knowing what to do. I'm just trying to help her be responsible for her child while not compromising her identity as non-binary. How can I help her do something as traditionally feminine as giving birth and possibly breastfeeding while respecting her non-binary identity? Am I being unreasonable? I feel like I'm losing her to some twisted version of reality. And I'm still not raising her baby, but at what point do I step in as the legal adult and make sure she's doing the right thing for herself and her child? It was like a whirlwind, emotions swirling and thoughts colliding as the reality of the situation hit. The daughter, still so young and confused, had come to her mother with a request that was as overwhelming as it was impossible. The plan, if it could even be called that, was shockingly brief. She was going to leave, no goodbyes, no explanations. But it didn't go as planned. The daughter made an abrupt exit, and the mother, left with nothing but silence and regret, could only reflect on the comments that followed, comments that weren't kind but carried a certain truth. The Reddit community responded with advice, some harsh, others laced with concern. The first comment hit hard, a blunt observation. I hate to say this, but I sincerely hope OP's daughter chooses to give up this baby for adoption. It was raw, not sugar-coated, with no intention of offering comfort. They saw the chaos in the daughter's actions, a mess of confusion and misplaced decisions, and couldn't fathom the mother stepping into a role that seemed impossible. If OP agrees to raise this child, it will only lead to more mess, more consequences, the commenter added. It was blunt, but there was a cold logic to it, one that hinted at even darker possibilities. Another commenter agreed, but this time, it was the daughter's confusion that sparked the discussion. Your child sounds so lost, they wrote. Maybe there's more going on here, body dysphoria or something else, but they're at a crossroads. It was like trying to piece together a puzzle with missing pieces. The daughter was not only struggling with identity but now had a baby on the way. But the decision she made, throwing away birth control, that was what stood out. That reckless action, which had set everything in motion, was a direct line to the mess they found themselves in now. Then came a comment that didn't hold back. Your child is acting like a child. The bluntness of it stung, but it was the truth. A teenager caught in a whirlwind of their own making, unable to see the consequences of their actions. The commenter pointed out the undeniable: birth control was not about feminization, it was responsibility, plain and simple. If you want to have sex and you're capable of getting pregnant, you need to be responsible, no matter what gender you identify as. The mother, reading through the comments, couldn't help but feel a sense of helplessness. She wished she had the right words to say when the daughter first confronted her. But what could she say? What could she possibly say when her daughter, so full of contradictions, had presented her with such an impossible choice? I wish I had those words when she hit me with that one, the mother wrote in response, but words felt meaningless now. They wouldn't fix what had been broken. The confusion didn't stop there. One more comment offered a potential solution, though it felt like grasping at straws. Maybe using chest feeding instead of breastfeeding would make your NB daughter feel seen, they suggested, a delicate attempt to bridge the gap in understanding. But even this suggestion felt like it was only scratching the surface. There were bigger issues at play here: therapy for the daughter, pregnancy checkups, and the looming question of whether she was even capable of taking responsibility for herself, let alone a child. It was overwhelming, a flood of advice and concern that only highlighted the uncertainty and tension hanging in the air. As the mother processed the responses, a sense of dread started to settle in. She wasn't ready for the storm that was coming. I'm already preparing to endure the storms, she admitted, not sugarcoating the reality of what was to come. There was no avoiding it. The pregnancy, the moods, the stress of it all. And at the center of it was her daughter, still locked in her room, still refusing to talk. But in the silence, the mother held onto a faint hope. She was determined to get her daughter the prenatal care she needed, no matter how difficult that would be. She hasn't had any prenatal care, she confessed, but she was resolved to change that, even if it meant battling every step of the way. In the midst of the turmoil, a small part of the mother acknowledged her own concerns. There were so many worries, so much regret, but at the core of it all was the baby, an innocent life caught in the middle of this storm. This has been a bad day, she admitted, unsure how to move forward but knowing she couldn't give up. And then, just as the situation seemed to spiral further, the daughter resurfaced, ready to talk. But this meeting? It would change everything. The place they chose was a public one, a small diner, but it might as well have been the battlefield. The tension was palpable. Sperm donor, that's what the mother had started calling him, the person who had gotten her daughter pregnant, and the one who had caused so many problems in the past. They had been part of her daughter's life for years, but the relationship had soured, and the mother had kicked him out of her house long ago. The meeting was a disaster from the start. The sperm donor came out swinging, attacking the mother for everything, accusing her of poisoning her daughter. There was no room for dialogue, only accusations. I only helped her get the prescription for birth control, the mother clarified, but it felt like nothing she said could make a difference. The sperm donor had his agenda, and it didn't include listening. The words that came next were like daggers, sharp and relentless. In this heated moment, the mother could see the truth in the chaos. If I don't agree to raise the baby, I'm a monster, they told her. It didn't matter that she was standing firm on her stance, adoption was the best option. To them, she was the villain, and they made sure she knew it. She stood at my door, a stranger in a body I once knew so well. The woman in front of me, pregnant and gaunt, was no longer the daughter I raised. She was unrecognizable, a reflection of someone who had endured too much, and yet, it was her, or at least, a version of her. The small, subtle tattoos marked her skin, adding years to her face, as if each one aged her tenfold. It was as if time had sped up in her absence. What had happened to her? She was only in her early 20s, but she looked like she had lived a lifetime of hardships. She chattered on and on, her words spilling out in a constant stream. I couldn't even get a word in. There was so much anger in her voice, so much bitterness, yet no acknowledgement of the hurt she had caused. No apology, no regret. All she could talk about was the grand fate she and her partner were building together. She spoke about their plans, the community they were creating, but never once did she mention the baby. The child she had brought into this chaotic world. Was this who she had become? A mouthpiece for a man who treated her like a possession. A broodmare, as I would describe it, though she called herself a queen. The smell of her was unbearable, a mixture of neglect and the rough life she had been living. I asked her to shower, not just for my sake, but for hers. She had clearly not bathed since leaving, her hair greasy, her clothes tattered. She looked like someone who had been lost in the wilderness, both physically and mentally. But even as she sat in the bathroom, showering away the grime of her life, I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't the same person I once knew. I changed the locks after she left the first time. It was a boundary I had to set. Yet, here she was, acting like nothing had changed. She assumed she could walk back into her old room, pick up where we left off, like the past few months hadn't happened. The audacity! She had blocked me out of her life without a word. No explanation, no closure. But now, she stood in front of me, expecting everything to be the same. As she finished, we sat down together, but there was no warmth between us. Just cold silence. She avoided eye contact, busying herself with her words, filling the room with meaningless chatter. And still, she never brought up the child. I wondered, was she even thinking about it? Had she completely lost herself in the life she had chosen with this man? Was this the path she wanted? Or was she trapped? I couldn't even begin to comprehend how this had all spiraled out of control. How had we gone from a close-knit family to this? To this, stranger? It was clear from the start that she was an oversharer, a complete mess. She seemed like a different person entirely, lost in a haze, and I finally cracked and asked her directly. What's going on? I had to know. She told me she'd been seeing the doctor regularly, but something about it didn't sit right with me. It turned out, she was lying. Everything was fine with the baby, but by this point, I had already started piecing things together. The pieces didn't add up. She had to be on something, some kind of drug. Whenever she was awake, she was talking, but none of it made sense. It was like she was trying to communicate but couldn't find the right words. Nothing she said had an end or a point. As time went on, her words became stranger. She started talking about how she and a group of others, women and men, were supposed to somehow create the next generation of people. Yes, men too, biological men. The sperm donor, as she called him, was supposed to be the center of some kind of bizarre wheel with spokes. I've met him before, and I'm still surprised he even managed to get one girlfriend, let alone whatever group was going on now. She kept going, saying she wanted to keep the baby, but she couldn't tell me how she planned on taking care of it. Sometimes she even talked about adoption, but not for the baby's sake. It wasn't about giving the child a better life, it was about spreading this idea of the new people. And that's when it hit me, something that would make people on the internet flip out. She didn't want the baby's gender to be revealed. Why? Because the new people were supposed to be without gender expectations. She couldn't even tell me the baby's gender, and that wasn't because she didn't know. It was because of this crazy idea of raising children without traditional labels. And just when I thought it couldn't get weirder, she added that some of the people in her group were empathic, they could communicate their feelings through the other world. As a house guest, she was the absolute worst. It wasn't just inconvenient, it was borderline feral. She barely cleaned up after herself, leaving things a mess. I can't even count how many times she left the toilet unflushed. She ate everything, of course, but never once cleaned up. She'd just demand, over and over, that I take her out to restaurants. I did it a few times, mostly because I missed her and thought we could reconnect. But it didn't help. Once, I even took her to the store for baby supplies. She was completely detached, picking up the first thing she saw on the shelf, all the while talking nonstop about her so-called true family and how they were going to change the world. Then came the moment when I finally found out her due date. She had always said mid-July, but when I checked my calendar, it didn't match up with what she had originally told me. I had been obsessed with the due date because I had no idea what was going to happen. Would she show up with a baby on my doorstep? I kept wondering. Despite all the lies, she was under the care of a doctor, though that didn't stop her from getting lost in her rambling conversations. Trying to focus her on one subject was impossible. She only stopped talking long enough to breathe, then it was back to talking about the sperm donor, who she loved but, strangely, was nowhere to be found. He was off with the rest of his group, doing God knows what. The whole thing was a mess, and I was just waiting for her to come down from whatever high she was on when labor hit. And it did, in full force. She was in pain, but her water hadn't broken yet. At the hospital, everything started to unravel. The truth came out, she had never seen a doctor for the baby. No regular appointments. Nothing. There were programs in our state that cover pregnancies, so it raised all sorts of red flags. She was immediately admitted, but that's when the switch flipped. She became hateful, vicious even, towards the nurses and doctors. She accused them of terrible things, calling them names and even telling them they were beneath her. It was bizarre, like something out of a nightmare. She was acting like a monster. And yet, she wasn't in active labor. I pulled one nurse aside and explained what I suspected, that she was on something, but I hadn't actually caught her using. The nurse handled it with grace, and they gave her painkillers to calm her down. And you know what? The drugs worked. She finally relaxed. But then, imagine my shock when her blood work came back clean. Clean! No drugs in her system. I wasn't there for the birth because she didn't want me in the room. And honestly, I was a little relieved. I didn't want to be anywhere near her after the way she had behaved. Still, I spoke to a social worker who was on staff. She was kind and understanding but couldn't speculate on my daughter's mental state. I told her my suspicions, that something was seriously wrong. But unless there was a direct threat, like harm to herself or the baby, they couldn't step in. Miraculously, the baby was born healthy, at a good weight, and not addicted to anything. I won't go into too much detail here because, someday, the child might search for their past, and I want to protect their privacy. But for all the chaos surrounding the birth, one thing was clear, the baby was lucky. But then, just hours after giving birth, she did something that left me speechless. She walked out of the hospital, leaving her baby behind. She didn't officially check out, didn't say goodbye. Because the hospital was a safe surrender point, they wouldn't charge her with abandonment. CPS asked if I wanted to take the baby, but I said no. And it tore me apart. There were so many reasons, but the biggest one? I didn't want to be tied to my daughter's whims, or worse, her sperm donor. I didn't want to be responsible for more children. And then, there's the way I looked at my daughter. I did the best I could, but look at what happened. Maybe I shouldn't try again. Maybe it's for the best that the baby ended up with a new family. Even if the foster system has its issues, it has to be better than what was going on with her. But even now, months later, I feel like garbage. I suspect my daughter will have more children soon, maybe even through her manipulative ways. I know my daughter is sick, both mentally and emotionally. She's in danger, but I'm scared that she might be dangerous too. I can't help but think that she's under the control of something much worse than herself. She thinks she has magical powers, that she can manipulate people with her mind, but none of it changes the fact that she's making incredibly bad choices. All the talk about the transgender stuff, the so-called new people, it doesn't matter. She's an adult now, and she's responsible for her actions. I can't even begin to describe the cruelty she showed the hospital staff. It was unbearable to witness. I had to use the word monster to even begin to explain it. It showed me something. She truly believes that others are beneath her, and that she is above everyone else. After everything, I let her come home for a while, expecting me to take care of her, because, of course, she was 9 months pregnant. But once she had no more need for me, once the baby was born, she was gone. Just like that. She made it clear, the baby was nothing more than a pawn in her twisted game. She didn't care about its future, about raising it, or about what kind of life it would have. Her only concern was pushing her movement forward. And now, looking back, I can't help but wonder where I went wrong. I've been ashamed to have raised someone with these values. Mentally ill people aren't inherently bad, but what my daughter has done goes beyond bad choices. It's terrifying. I haven't completely written her off yet. There's always the hope she'll come back to reality, but if I'm being honest, I'm not sure. Right now, I'm thinking about my boundaries, and maybe even moving away. The idea of weirdos showing up at my doorstep one day terrifies me. I feel like I'm stuck in this twisted nightmare with no way out. I don't have the resources to help my daughter. I don't even have the legal standing to do anything. The only good thing? The baby is safe. That's my one bright spot. But even that doesn't feel like enough. I don't know what to do anymore. Any advice? Or am I just way off base? Either way, it's been one hell of a year. A year ago, I had a teenager under my roof. Now look where we are.